communication is the way that hormones talk to their target cells. The endocrine system is very precise. Only target cells that have receptors can respond to specific hormones. The receptors are not present on all cells in many cases. Some are more prevalent than others, but we'll get into that. The major endocrine glands are not physically connected. It is a diffuse system. It's the only one we've seen so far that wasn't directly connected to each other, each organ. The hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, adrenal, and pancreas are going to be important hormones. There are also many other hormones, and there are even some hormones that are produced by small groups of specialized cells in different organs, like the heart, for example. Hormones are released into the extracellular spaces around those endocrine cells, and they diffuse into the bloodstream, where they are distributed to the entire body. But only those cells that have receptors for them will respond to them. I'll go through a few of these, but you're going to have to go through this table in your book and get your information, especially for doing your homework. So the hypothalamus has corticotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, somatostatin growth hormone releasing hormone, prolactin release inhibiting hormone. The anterior pituitary has adrenocorticotropic, which we will often call ACTH, growth hormone, prolactin, and thyroid stimulating hormone. Talk about the factor here shortly. Then we have the pituitary gland, thyroid gland, parathyroid, adrenal medulla, adrenal cortex, the pancreas. So hormones come in two different types. There are either steroid or steroid-like hormones. The steroids are lipids that contain a complex ring of carbon and hydrogen atoms. Their steroid hormones are produced from cholesterol as a starting point. Testosterone and estrogens, the sex hormones, would be steroid-based hormones. Adrenal cortex hormones such as cortisol and aldosterone. Because these are lipid soluble, they are able to cross plasma membranes on their own. The receptors for these would be found inside the cytoplasm. The non-steroid hormones would be derived basically from amino acids or proteins. So the amines are derived from tyrosine. That would include epinephrine and norepinephrine. There are some that are proteins, long enough to be called proteins, growth hormone, for example. Some that are peptides, which would just be short chains of amino acids. Oxytocin would be one of those. And then there are some of these proteins that have carbohydrates attached to them. So we call those glycoproteins. And thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, would be an example of a glycoprotein. So amines, peptides, proteins, glycoproteins, steroids. We've got amino acids. Peptides are built from amino acids, as are proteins. Glycoproteins are proteins with sugars attached to them, and then steroids are cholesterol-based. And examples of each one. Again, you should be going through these tables in your text and using your text to answer your homework questions. There's some structural formulas for hormones. You can see cortisol is a steroid hormone. Norepinephrine is not. It's built from an amino acid. This is a parathyroid hormone, very long. Each one of those colored boxes represents a single amino acid. Hormones exert effects by altering metabolic process. They may alter enzyme activity, or they may alter the rate of membrane transport of a substance. They deliver their message by binding to the receptor. That receptor may be on the surface of the cell or may be inside the target cell, depending on whether it's a steroid or other amino acid-based hormone. Receptors, the number of receptors, the strength of binding to that receptor can be changed, and that will help alter the response we can get cases where upregulation, so you can increase the number of receptors on the target cell in response to a decrease in hormone level. You could also get downregulation, which decrease in the number of receptors on the target cell. That may often be due to the increase in hormone levels. You don't need as many receptors. Steroid and thyroid hormones are not very water soluble. Steroid hormones can diffuse through the lipid bilayer of the plasma membrane. Thyroid hormones are thought to enter the cell by a specific transport mechanism, but their actual receptor, the effective receptor, is inside the cell and usually directs them to the nucleus. So for steroid hormone action, endocrine gland would release that steroid hormone, the blood would take it throughout the body, it would diffuse through target cell membranes, enter the cytoplasm or nucleus, and then the hormone would combine with a receptor molecule in the cytoplasm or nucleus, and the steroid hormone receptor complex becomes a DNA binding protein complex that promotes the turning on of messenger RNAs. Those messenger RNAs would then come into the cytoplasm where they would be built into the proteins that they are supposed to make, and those newly synthesized proteins would be what was causing the effect we wanted from a steroid hormone. So the hormone would enter the plasma membrane, in this case enter the nuclear membrane, complex with an intercellular receptor forming a DNA binding protein, bind a sequence of DNA, probably a promoter sequence, to turn on a gene and cause the transcription of a messenger RNA from that DNA, activate a gene that would then leave the nucleus, find the ribosome, and be translated into a protein molecule. The non-steroidal ones don't penetrate the lipid membrane of the cell. They're going to bind to receptors on the surface of the target cell. The hormone in that case would be considered the first messenger. That's the first thing that happens, is that messenger binds to a receptor. The chemical combination would cause changes inside the cell, and those molecules would be second messengers. A lot of hormones use cyclic AMP as a second messenger. That's ATP with two phosphates removed and then hooked up to itself end to end. That entire process of chemical communication from outside the cell to inside is called signal transduction, because that message has to go from the hormone binding to the receptor activating the second messengers, and the second messengers doing what they do inside the cell. So an endocrine gland in this case would secrete a non-steroid hormone. The blood would carry it to the hormone throughout the body. It would combine with receptors on the surface of target cells. That would activate a second messenger system, one of which is a G protein. The G protein would cause adenylate cyclase to be activated in the cell's membrane, and adenylate cyclase would take AMP and make it into cyclic AMP. The cyclic AMP would then work on enzymes called kinases, which put phosphates on other proteins, and putting a phosphate on a protein is the equivalent of turning a light switch. Sometimes when you put a phosphate on, it activates it. Sometimes when you put a phosphate on, it turns it off. But those changes in how the enzymes work are going to change the metabolic process, and that metabolic process is going to produce the effect you're looking for from that particular hormone. So here we have a non-steroid hormone binds to its receptor, first messenger. The receptor is attached to a G protein. That G protein becomes activated and it turns on an enzyme called adenylate cyclase. So this is a second messenger system. Adenylate cyclase takes ATP, makes it into cyclic AMP. That, in this case, is going to turn on a kinase. This protein kinase is not putting phosphates on anything because it's not turned on, but cyclic AMP will combine and it'll become active, and will start putting phosphates on other enzymes in the cell to get the action that the non-steroid hormone is supposed to get. We can abuse hormones to improve athletic performance. Steroids have been used to increase muscular strength, but they do have harmful side effects, decreasing natural testosterone production, stunning growth, breast development in males, male sexual characteristics in females, damage to the kidney, liver, or heart, cholesterol problems, and psychiatric problems. You've heard of roid rage, I am sure. Growth hormone has also been used to enlarge muscles. Can be used with or without steroids. Erythropoietin is a hormone that causes red blood cells to be produced. Red blood cells deliver oxygen to the body, so some athletes take erythropoietin to increase their number of red blood cells, and thus oxygenate better. Erythropoietin is a very important enzyme. It treats certain forms of anemia. It is very important in cancer treatments. However, you should not be using it if you are healthy, because some of the side effects that are possible include heart attacks and death. Prostaglandins are a paracrine. They are very potent in small amounts, like hormones. They are not stored in the cells, synthesized just before released. They are rapidly inactivated after their use. They regulate cell responses to hormones. They can activate or inhibit adenylate cyclase, which would help control cyclic AMP production and alter the response to hormones. They have a wide variety of effects. They may be contracting and relaxing smooth muscles, stimulating or inhibiting secretion, regulating blood pressure, several others. They're called paracrines because they only work over a short distance. Controlling hormone secretions is primarily controlled by negative feedback mechanisms. So a hormone effect can be short-lived or last for days. So hormone secretions are precisely regulated, and hormones are excreted in the urine after they exert their effects. They can be broken down by enzymes, mainly in the liver, to stop their effects, but it's a negative feedback mechanism. So production of the hormone leads to the effect you want. That effect will cause a reduction in hormone secretion, or lack of an effect will cause an increase in hormone secretion. Okay, we'll stop there.